just hope for this beautiful continent we call home. We're sustaining our soil and enriching lives. We're giving our children a brighter tomorrow. We're investing in small businesses to grow the economy. And we're bringing warmth and light to the people who need it most. And by investing in our planet, we're passing this all on to future generations too. Great things are possible when we invest together. That's why we're invested in changing Africa's tomorrow.
Democratic Alliance leader Mmusi Maimane showed a brave face when he reacted to his party's performance in the 2019 elections. He says he's not worried about his position as DA leader after the party's slightly poorer showing at the polls.
Now no leader enters a race looking for a loss. No person goes into a tournament or a competition wanting to go. You go and you win. And you go and you work hard. And I'm proud of what the DA has done. We could have succumbed to populist narratives. We could have succumbed to forgetting our values. But we've stuck the course and we've gone backwards. We've gone and fought for that. And even though we've lost some votes, I can guarantee you that we've held the center. We as a party will go back and work even harder to regain those votes.
Analysts say a number of well-established political parties are performing poorly in this election. The UDM, IFP and COPE are seeing fewer votes compared to previous elections, as so far are the ANC and the DA. Parties targeting a specific constituency like the Socialist Revolutionary Workers' Party, the Women Party and the Land Party are also failing to win significant support.
The emergence of more political parties targeting a specific audience through raising the one burning issue that the electorate resonates with has seen these elections having the longest ballot paper, with 48 political parties contesting the elections. But these political parties are not doing well. They are struggling to attract a huge audience to have a stronger voice in parliament.
It's not particularly working for many of them. As I said, of the more than 40 parties contesting this election, perhaps six of those very small parties will find some traction in national parliament. So one has to ask oneself whether an implicit threshold is actually necessary.
But some of them say it is not the message they are sending that is the problem, but getting the message across.
Elections in this country are so costly to an extent that even if you've got a good message, as long as you don't have money, as long as you don't have resources, to make sure that your message reaches as many people as possible.
But there's another elephant in the room. The parties that have been under the helm of one leader for the longest time. Many of these are leaders who have formed these political parties. It would seem there is no party without them.
What I do know is that Principal Selezi will never die. Even when he's no longer the leader of the IFP, he will forever be present in the leadership that he has groomed, in the party that he has founded.
The UDM has also been losing support over the years, with the emergence of new political parties, including the ATM. Analysts warn that the party might do even worse in these elections. But analysts say there are parties where the electorate is attracted to a party specifically because of its leader, like the Good Party under Patricia de Lille. Busisiwe Jemsana Mantashe, SABC News, Pretoria.
Let's continue with our election coverage and the results. We cross now to Sipho Steerman. Sipho, a very good afternoon to you. Take us through what's happening now.
Well, a very good afternoon to you and our viewers at home. We continue to crisscross the capital city as we get reactions. Of course, this is as counting is underway at the EISA Results Center. The numbers are trickling in there. A number of political parties are giving media, briefings as the numbers are giving us a clear picture. But one province that seems to be very tightly contested, that is the province of Gauteng. And we understand the numbers are now just over 60% that have been counted, and we are seeing that the ANC, which of course has been ruling this province for quite some time, is now under 50%, which then brings into the conversation the talk of coalitions, and that is where we're at. And right now I am joined by Advocate Sipho Matola. Thank you very much, sir, for talking to us. Gauteng is very tightly contested. Talk to us about what makes Gauteng such a critical province and one that is fiercely contested by these parties.
Sipho, remember that we have 36 political parties contesting for this 2019 elections. Secondly, this is an economic hub. And thirdly, this is the party where most of the presidents have been struggling. You will think of Zuma has been in Gauteng, Mbeki has been in Gauteng, Ramaphosa has been doing campaigns in Gauteng, EFF has been doing campaigns in Gauteng. So Gauteng, it's a hotly contested based on the diversity of voters, and thirdly, one can say that because of the new actors, you have the new actors who are splitting votes now. Your ATM, your BLF, all those new emerging parties are starting to show majority of multi-party democracy.
All right, but right now obviously it's not yet declared final. Correct. But we are at over 60%, and the trend is what we are seeing is that the ANC is on the decline. Yeah. DA has not made a greater inroads as well. EFF is going up. What does that tell us?
That is telling you that the young voters have given their trust and their confidence to the EFF for this second time since 2014, and actually it is telling you that until the last count, Sipho, that will be critical to understand whether we're going for that political coalitions, marriage of convenience, marriage of cohabitation, what we saw in the 2016 local government elections, tussling of DA and EFF and ANC as well. But political coalitions, it is a right way to go in South Africa, because since 1994 we have been having coalitions.
All right, now let's talk about the DA particularly, and they've just given a briefing there. The DA leader Musima Imane, they went with that is Soli Msimanga as their premier candidate. Soli had a somewhat controversial tenure as a Tshwane mayor himself. He had a bit of a controversial tenure there. So was he the right choice?
I don't think so, because coming out of the 20...
Sipho Simon in Pretoria, they're giving us some analysis. We're now going to go to the Nelson Mandela Foundation media briefing. Of course, before we go to that, let's go to that now.
To give his feedback, followed by Jackie Siroke. Mr. Hatang.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I think for us, it's commonly believed that the priority for Madiba in terms of the first administration was to just deal with issues of reconciliation. We believe that part of that legacy should be read as including having to make democracy stick. And today, as our 6th general election comes to a close, we can confidently say that democracy is sticking in South Africa. Processes can be noisy, can be messy, but the center is holding. So in our view, these elections represent the wishes of the people. The board of the Nelson Mandela Foundation mandated us to, as Tsepo said earlier on, to observe the elections in order to promote public confidence in the efficacy and honesty of the electoral process and in the assessment of the voting process, and to contribute our findings and develop insights as to what needs to be done differently for us to get these things right. We work closely with a few legacy foundations which were outlined by Tsepo, which you have. And we want to express our gratitude to the IEC and its personnel for providing the foundations with intensive training in preparation for the elections. So let me begin with a few disclaimers. Firstly, this is the first time we have done this voter observation process. So it has been very much a learning experience for us. Secondly, we have not been able to study all the observer reports, which, as outlined, we will be able to report to release in the next 30 days, within the next 30 days. And they will be made available on all the sites of the different foundations. So our deeper analysis and full reports will be made available on our sites. Fourthly, we had only 41 observers on the ground, all of them in Gauteng from the Nelson Mandela Foundation's perspective. However, from the other foundations, they managed to cover the length and breadth of the country. So I was one of these observers, and I think it's important that we note that about 49% of the observers from the foundation were male and 51% were female. In terms of our observations, I'll just take you through a few of these observations. From the positive side, we're saying we had a committed IC Commission and its executive team. They worked tirelessly to ensure that they deliver these elections. And I think as a country, we should express our gratitude to the IEC for the work that they did. Secondly, that the staff members at all levels also did their sterling job to get these elections going. Political parties and party agents observed the rules and regulations and code of conduct. Of course, there were exceptions, but where observers were deployed, we had just political observers also playing their part. Things like cancelled or contested ballots were quarantined and marked by the DPO or the PO with the involvement of party agents. And this is critical because every bit of the elections, when someone had to describe what does it mean that a ballot is cancelled, and those were then quarantined, and in every station where we observed, they were dealt with it in accordance with the rules. The training that I mentioned earlier on, it was critical for us to know what to expect and what we needed to do. And I think there's no doubt that with that kind of training, we managed to at least pull a few things together in the station itself. These are things that concern us, and we have 5 observations that concern us. Orientation of the voting booths did not give a sense of secrecy during the ballot marking process. So I know that the IEC decided to make them to turn to what they call the ATM style. So we had, in almost all the sites where we observed, people complained that people who were coming from the door, they could see where they were marking. So that the orientation needs to be something that we look into. Incidents of voting stations opening on time, it's not opening on time rather. So those that opened late. In all the observations, none of them did not open at all. So there were few that opened late, but in overall, most of them opened on time. Delays caused at multiple stations due to non-functioning stationery. So one of the things that we observed was how the scanners were not either once they ran out of the roll, we had to wait forever, what felt like forever, for them to be refilled. In the meantime, people are then being made to wait. And then insufficient ballot papers that were delivered to the voting districts. I think this is important because in one instance, there was an observer who noted that within the first hour, they had run out of ballot papers. So it means that there was no proper planning for that to then be taken on board. The last one being on special voting days. Some of the voting districts did not open on that day. So at least one of my colleagues was told they can vote at this station. They went over and the station was not opened at all. So it would be good to then know how many of that happened. So in terms of those who are just outright negative, we have 2 of those. The scanners that were insufficient, I think the rule now was that they should use 1 scanner per voting station. And that scanner, once it faced any kind of problem, you had to wait for a new one to come through. This might have been a security feature, but we don't believe that it was, we believe that it was a miss. I think it's something that we need to then deal with. The last one in terms of the negative observations was access by disabled voters. I think this is an important element that needs to be dealt with from the point of accessing the station, but also in terms of them waiting in the queues. We had instances where old people and disabled people were made to wait because the queue marshal who was supposed to then make sure that those people were brought in did not do what they were supposed to do. So I think that's something that we need to then look into and deal with. In terms of the next steps, so we're going to then have a complete synthesis of all these reports, which I said we will then post within the next 30 days. And these reports will also be submitted to the IEC. And we will have the post-election consultations that we need to then have. In closing, let me emphasize a few things. Firstly, for the Foundation and its volunteer observers, this has been a rich and rewarding experience. It is an honor to be part of democracy in action. And I think to the CEO of the IEC, we want to again commend you and your executive team because you gave us an opportunity to look into the world that is complex. It's difficult. It's demanding of us to be more understanding. Secondly, we have seen enough to indicate that while the integrity of the 2019 general election overall is secure, nonetheless, the election process has areas of vulnerability, and that moving forward, we need to work, what needs to be done to make the system more robust. And there's no doubt that we might want to put in more technology, beef up this with more technology. We'll be making recommendations in this regard to the IEC directly. And thirdly, we are concerned that at relatively low levels of participation in elections generally in South Africa. This is an important thing that we need to be observing. Those long queues of 1994 should be something that we yearn to bring back. It says something about people having lost hope in democracy. There are many reasons maybe that people didn't come through, but we need to bring back those long queues because it's those long queues that tell us that people believe that democracy is not captured. It's still serving the poor and the vulnerable, especially the young people. It speaks to an alienation from the political process and the lack of and the loss of confidence in the capacity of elected officials to meet the needs and promote the interests of the constituencies. Addressing this challenge has to be a priority for everyone who believes in the deepening of democracy and making constitutionalism an instrument of transformation. I hope that elected officials this year will feel the burden of responsibility to serve the people of South Africa with integrity. So I'd like to then say that we are grateful to the chairperson, the deputy chairperson, the CEO of the IEC who believed in us and entrusted this process in us, that we should help with this process. And I'm hoping that all South Africans, including the fellow foundations, will continue to hold hands with the IEC as we build democracy that serves the majority.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the National Foundation's Dialogue Initiative, we have done a summary and focused on salient point of the elections. Each foundation has deployed its own members on the ground in various parts of the country to make this observation. So there's a summary of all those views that I'm presenting now, but there's greater detail that will be given by each of the foundations. And here is what we think is salient. In the first instance, we believe that South African citizens have behaved very well during these elections. They have made their choice willingly and freely and have behaved in accordance with the electoral law without coercing, influencing other people in any way whatsoever. And each citizen has been able to cast their vote and did so in a responsible manner. And for that, we think it's a good indication of continuing support for a democratic system. We also observe that citizens who have their own difficulties have voted with their feet by not going to the poll station. And I think the figures will show that at the end of the process. And it's the IEC that will the reasons for not voting are not quite clear, but it's a concern for us. Representing civil society, we also want to say that the IEC itself is maturing in conducting this election. It has a solid leadership that's able to do an important work for the country, and they've been able to do this without prejudice against smaller parties and without favoring the dominant parties in the country. And most of the parties who have come in have given the IEC an increased weight because they have to deal with newcomers, they have to deal with parties that are already au fait with how to conduct themselves during elections. And in all this, we've observed that the IEC has been managing the process very well. We think also that despite all this, the 2019 elections is okay. It has been conducted freely and fairly, and our conclusion is that whatever results that are come out, they reflect the will of the people. There's been a few points that we felt we should raise with regard to the conduct of the elections, and some of them have been outlined by the Nelson Mandela Foundation. But one of the issues that we've seen with the national and provincial election, and we want to highlight this, is that the S24A forms, these are the forms that allow you to vote at an area that is not where you are registered. For instance, when you do local government elections. That process has created a lot of chaos and has been handled on the spot, but on its own, because people had to fill in the forms and vote at an area. And this affected the number of prepared votes for that area. So the IEC needs to jack up their work, beef up on this aspect so that there's no difficulties. And we found that in most instances, this is one of the reasons why the allocated ballots were not enough for people who come to vote at a given area. And they also gave an impression to some party agents and observers that some people were voting illegally. So it's an aspect that needs to be looked at. We also think that the IEC staff itself has not been adequately trained in some areas to deal with special votes and how this should be conducted, especially votes where they go to request to vote from the elderly, the disabled and so on, voting from their homes. when they come in there, some receptions were not so good, and there are reports that came in to say those special votes were either rejected or people did not vote because they were mistaken to be imposters or to be fake and not representing the IEC, because some people who needed assistance with voting needed to be sure that they are dealing with the right persons. It may be a small number, but it's a particular concern. There's also been a gray area with identifying what exactly is a spoiled ballot among the party agents and the IEC official. And some of the differences between the parties in a voting station have created a lot of concern, because the player should have the same understanding of the rules and so on. So those details need a bit of extra proper management so that there's no confusion about what exactly is a spoiled ballot. And we found that coming from some IEC officials, it's not okay. And lastly, this is really for the IEC management, that some of their staff needed support because they were working for long hours. It's long hours from Monday, the 6th, the 7th, and the 8th. And on the 8th itself, it's extraordinarily long hours on duty. And some IEC staff members were not able to continue with that because of fatigue, they're tired, they're hungry, there's no shift allocation and so on. And you could see this in their faces, that the people, some even needing a break to have food because they did not bring lunch boxes and so on. This is tiny detail, but as you know, the devil is in the details. So we think that the IEC must look at those devils so that we don't have glitches anymore. And with this is my closing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. We will now open the floor for any questions. There are some colleagues with microphones, and we'll take 4 questions at a time. Any questions?
Is the microphone on? Am I audible?
No.
Am I audible now? Thank you so much. Francis Luamachate from Progressive Independent News Agency. Having observed these elections, I want to believe you are aware that 35 of 48 political parties which participated in these elections are having some grievances. Do you think they have a reasonable ground on their grievances? And what do you think needs to happen from here? Thank you so much.
Hello. Onga Dulane from EWN. Just a clarification, please. Why was this necessary? I mean, if the IEC has their own observers, was this like a way of trying to see if everything is done by the book, or was there other? I just want a clarification on that. Why exactly you felt the need that you needed to do this? Because I understand it's the first time, and it will be happening again going through the other elections. And just to piggyback on that question too, on the smaller parties, they seem to have an idea that they don't want to be called disgruntled, so I'll just say unhappy of what happened. So do you think there needs to be more paid attention to these smaller details in order to avoid situations like these, despite them not even reaching the mark that they wanted to reach? Thank you.
Thank you. Mpomukwena from ISBSA. I just want to clarify something from the first presentation in terms of shortage here, the ballot paper. To say, remember that people were allowed to vote anyway and everywhere. So therefore, that's why all the voting stations said the ballot paper, they were running out. Because even people from other provinces, for example, children who are coming from KwaZulu-Natal, maybe to Gauteng, Balengo University, they will just come and vote and use that one off national. So that is why that I don't think it is because Kibu insufficient by IEC. I just wanted to clarify that part, that this was national elections, so therefore it is not like local elections whereby it's ward-based. Thank you.
There's an opportunity for one more question.
Good afternoon. My name is Sipongwanyana and I'm from the Alliance for Transformation for All. I'd like to welcome the presentation, and I'd like to also add that if our democracy is indeed to deepen and our elections therefore to be legitimized, we as the parties that have added to the number of parties would like to emphasize the need and the importance of, in fact, the concerns that have been raised in this presentation, which add to possibilities of the election itself being questioned or questionable. And we'd like cognizance to be taken both by the IEC as well as the necessary legislative houses in terms of ensuring that the legislative framework ensures that the playing field is indeed level. Because if you look at the grievances of the parties here in this election, you'll realize that in fact most of the grievances are rooted in a belief that flows from the fact that there's a tradition, so to speak, to say we expect that so and so will win the election. So we think that the more that other bodies like this presentation has indicated that indeed there are other parties that look into and fairly and justifiably and independently evaluate and report on the elections, the better that our democracy will get the nod that it needs for peace to prevail. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We'll give the two gentlemen an opportunity to respond. Mr. Hatang, you.
No, thank you very much. The first question was about the grievances. I think our democracy has systems in place. The reason you have a system that you can be allowed to even chair, for example, when your party gets 10 more votes, is that you can have you have an appeal system, you can go to court if you so wish, but in our view, all the complaints that have been raised, they are not substantial enough for the elections to be questioned. That's why we believe that the elections present well in terms of them being free and fair. Of course, if they do have legitimate concerns, they can go to court or whichever platform that they need. In terms of what next, we believe that the IEC, it's up to the IEC, of course, once they have received those complaints. What we do not want to advocate for is ignoring people's concerns. So once you receive these concerns, they must be dealt with. Listening to, this is now going off what was asked, but listening to some of the comments from the smaller parties, when someone says, I'm going to vote for you, and them actually voting for you, it's two different things, I think. So a promised vote, a vote promised and a vote delivered are two different things. And I guess counting your eggs before they hatch, it leads to disappointments like this. But one should go to court if you feel that you feel strong enough. Why did we do what we did? Civil society needs to play a critical part in terms of building our democracy. We are part of the citizenry of this country, and we need to ensure that we play a part. It's one thing to always be outside criticizing. It's quite another to get your hands dirty and make sure that things work out the way you want it to be. I want to maybe quote Madiba when he said that the question that should bother each one of us is, what am I doing to help build a country of my dreams? So as a country of dreamers, we shouldn't just be dreaming, we should dream working for that kind of country that we want. And that's why we did what we did. The IEC, in its wisdom, then included us, and that's why it's important for us to thank the IEC's commissioners and the executive that they saw it fit this year to then see this happening. The question was, will it happen in future? We hope so. And I'm looking at the CEO and the commissioner there saying, we hope that we'll be roped in every time, because the experience we got now should be used in future. The question of ballots running out, I concede that that's part of the problem. But one of the things that we were saying is, there should be a monitoring process. So your question, you're saying that it's because people were allowed to vote anywhere, but there should be a monitoring, constant monitoring. How far are we in terms of the ballots, so that people don't wait? So that was the point that we were making. Not necessarily that it was inefficiency in terms of number of the allocated ballots. So the experience of a couple of the observers was the IEC officials waited until they were finished and then went out to go look for the new ballots. So the question is monitoring, so that you don't have a process of the long wait for those ballots. So there should be that constant monitoring. Thank you. I think those were
We'll take a last round of questions and close the briefing. Are you fine, gentlemen? I'm going to close. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. Much appreciated. Inesi.
As part of Africa, we're giving its people the great future it deserves with an investment partner like no other, you. We've invested 120 billion rands of our money and yours into creating more than just hope for this beautiful continent we call home. We're sustaining our soil and enriching lives. We're giving our children a brighter tomorrow. We're investing in small businesses to grow the economy. And we're bringing warmth and light to the people who need it most. And by investing in our planet, we're passing this all on to future generations too. Great things are possible when we invest together. That's why we're invested in changing Africa's tomorrow.
Now the Hurricanes have triumphed over the Blues in their Super Rugby clash at Eden Park in Auckland. It was a tight contest, but the Canes outclassed their opponents. It scored 3 tries to 2 for a 22-12 victory. They are now just 1 point behind combined log leaders, the Crusaders. Here are some of the highlights.
Floyd Balogun goes hard and Barrett goes through Barrett. And another tackle. This time it's made, but the pass is away and it's a try to the Blues. Ripped away though by Laumape for the Hurricanes. Ben Lam, first touch of the game, smashes right through the middle of them and scores. Hurricanes will want to clear it. Perenara fires it away to Barrett, to his brother Johnny. He's in. Now Rico Ioane. Papali'i now. Bowden Barrett tried to make the tackle, couldn't stop him. He's in, but did he get it down in time? Dalton Papali'i. And this time, good scrum from the Hurricanes, but the Blues have got an intercept. Bowden Barrett. See you later.
Those were your news headlines. My colleague Arabile Gomede will have your market news coming up after a short break, as well as more results as they pour in. Do stay with us on SABC News.
As part of Africa, we're giving its people the great future it deserves with an investment partner like no other, you. We've invested 120 billion rands of our money and yours into creating more than just hope for this beautiful continent we call home. We're sustaining our soil and enriching lives. We're giving our children a brighter tomorrow. We're investing in small businesses to grow the economy. And we're bringing warmth and light to the people who need it most. And by investing in our planet, we're passing this all on to future generations too. Great things are possible when we invest together. That's why we're invested in changing Africa's tomorrow.
We've seen that Brent crude oil rise about 30% this year alone.
Brent crude that's going steadily firmer speaks to a global economy that's in good shape. What we don't want to see are supply interruptions or sudden spikes.
The Bank of Athens has become Grow Bank. It plans to be a bank using digital and personable relations with its customers in the agricultural and food value chain space.
We're a lucky bank in that we are small. We're already working with artificial intelligence to allow us to manage our customer data.
Agriculture is a business. If we're going to take people, millions of them out of poverty, we've got to turn agriculture into a mega sector that works for everybody.
I use my name first and foremost. That's all I heard, and from using the name I got a small loan of 8,000 rand.
I remember there is a time la sa zama kumfunela umsebenzi.
Welcome back. Let's get into the markets now. Tokyo's shares closed lower this morning. That's for the fourth consecutive session this week as the United States began to increase tariffs on Chinese products, and Beijing immediately vowed to then hit back. We'll get a whole lot more on that story a little bit as well. This led Shanghai then leading the gains across Asian markets this morning as well in what has been a torrid week for equities. Equities started the day on what is a high as dealers took heart from positive comments from Donald Trump on the prospects for a deal. But the region turned negative as the threatened levies kicked in and China vowed to hit back, saying it deeply regretted the United States' move and will put in place necessary countermeasures. Tokyo's Nikkei dipped 0.3% to 21,344 points. The Hang Seng, however, has gained 0.8%, closing the day out at 28,606 points there. The Shanghai Composite, the biggest gainer of the day, 3.1%, 2,939 points. Over to the United States now, and Wall Street's main indices fell on Thursday. A lot of that ahead of the critical trade negotiations, of course. This is last night between the United States and China, though they had pared losses significantly after US President Donald Trump said reaching a deal this week was actually possible. So, some good news there. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 0.5% to 25,827 points, while the S&P 500 lost 0.33%, closing out at 2,870, and the Nasdaq Composite was 0.4% cheaper at 7,910 points. So the markets itself has all been looking at that China-US trade story. Donald Trump issuing perhaps a final salvo, saying that things needed to be sorted out before 6 o'clock South African time this morning. Otherwise, that levy of 25% would be put on Chinese goods. So the markets across the globe perhaps feeling a sense of negativity. But locally, however, we've seemingly come back and things are faring a lot more positive. And a lot of that, of course, based on the elections that have certainly played their part. And this is exactly how the markets are looking. FTSE 100 there, as you can tell, that market sitting pretty good thus far, including the DAX and the CAC, and all of these perhaps rebounding somewhat, as you can tell, to things from China and the United States. Perhaps some hope that despite the fact that the tariffs have indeed been put in place, things will certainly change. It has changed things across the globe as well. And this has been the main focus area as well. When you check on the local bourse, now headed back towards that 58,000 point mark. We've lost quite a bit, but on the week we will lose out, unfortunately, in the negative for the JSE by the seams of things, and that also then means that it's a second week in a row of negative moves for the JSE, and that has sent out a negative sentiment as well across some of the indices. On the commodities board, everything headed a little bit higher, including that oil price, and a lot of that still based on that China-US trade talk scenario. That means demand for that commodity is seemingly expected to maneuver things in that fashion, so that price headed all the way up now, freshly towards that $71 a barrel mark. And the currency picture as well, things have fared slightly differently. South Africa's currency doing a whole lot better this morning as well. A whole lot of that perhaps based on that election result. The ANC expected to maintain their majority, even though it may not necessarily be above that 60% mark. They had fallen below 50% when it comes to Gauteng as well. But they do maintain a majority across 8 of the 9 provinces. The Western Cape officially going to the Democratic Alliance, with the ANC taking the Northern Cape as well. So that's the state of South Africa's markets. But let's touch on that China-US trade story. How have things fared exactly? This is the scenario. According to the American Apparel and Footwear Association, a 25% increase, or that 25% levy on goods from China, does mean that a family of 4 would have a 500 Rand a year increase in their apparel costs. So this is going to be heavy. This is bound to hurt. The US is now charging a 25% tariff on $200 billion US dollars worth of Chinese imports. As of 12:01 a.m. Eastern Time, which in South African terms was at 6:01 a.m. this morning. China's retort when this effectively came on board was that China expresses deep regret over the development and then will be bringing on and will have to take necessary countermeasures. What that means, we're not necessarily sure, and I suppose the market will be asking itself how exactly things will fare. But today is, of course, the day when we perhaps look at how exactly things will fare with the trade talk itself. Of course, markets will be looking for a solution, looking for a way to move forward. What happens from here on in? Will the United States be able to perhaps fix things with China? Will Xi Jinping, after sending what Donald Trump called a beautiful letter, be able to fix things as well for them? Or will it be another case of negative sentiment for not only China, but also the United States? It is the big story, including, of course, South Africa's elections. Warwick Lucas from Galileo Capital joins us in studio to unpack this and a whole lot more. Warwick, thank you so much for the time. That China trade story definitely takes over everything else, doesn't it?
Very much so. I mean, obviously some concern of will this lead to a further setback. After all, I think a lot of anticipation of successful resolution of those talks has been baked into markets, and a deep setback would obviously, I think, have much further impact than is currently in the case. So markets clearly hoping that where we are at the moment is really nothing more than last-minute brinkmanship, that some internal stresses perhaps on the Chinese side get resolved, and this is just the last-minute details.
But still, though, to have such what seems like a very massive increase, and I mean on the South African front, maybe we can attest some of that to the elections. But Europe seems to be all buoyant this afternoon, and things are faring better. Asian markets were mostly in the green on that front too. So where are they getting that great spirited sense of positivity, as opposed to perhaps a negative sentiment, or even flat, to perhaps say we're a little nervous, not really sure where to put our money?
Yeah, I think some of it certainly seems to be taking bets that this is last minute brinkmanship. And after all, I mean, the falls earlier in the week were quite severe, so you would have an element of technical rebound. I think the most bearish opinion out there being the Japanese one, when you saw their market down. So that was quite an important indicator. I think we're not out of the woods yet, that's for sure. It's,
so you see a resolution though? Do you see some sense of positive resolution then for the market? Do you see them at least coming out of this today and saying, yeah, we finally found something?
Look, I think both sides are trying to be at pains to give each other working room. I mean, for example, tariffs are not applied to boats on the water, it's only new shipments. So I think they're giving some latitude here, that they're not trying to lift each other's heads off.
Yeah.
They're just showing how tough they can be ahead of a final squaring off.
Yeah.
We hope.
Of course. We're going to continue the conversation in just a bit as well then, Warwick. But very quickly, the EISA Observer Mission is about to brief the media, of course, in Pretoria. Of course, we've been having election coverage across the board. We cross live to that. We will continue our business conversation in just a moment, but we head off to that right now.
To multi-party democracy 25 years ago, arguably, they are the most competitive in the country's history. 76 political parties contested the election at both the national and provincial levels. Several factors shaped the pre-election context for the 2019 elections. These include the outcome of the 2016 municipal elections, the debate on state capture, the leadership transition within the ruling party ANC, service delivery protests, alleged political killings, and xenophobic attacks in some regions, and the recent flooding across parts of KwaZulu-Natal and Eastern Cape provinces. These issues shaped the tone and content of the campaigns and raised concerns about electoral security and operations. The EISA EOM observed the final week of party campaigns across the 9 provinces. Our observers attended 14 campaign events across 4 provinces. Our observation team noted that parties conducted their campaigns freely in a context that was largely free of fear and intimidation. There were reports of isolated incidents of violence in KwaZulu-Natal province, where there were politically motivated killings. Our mission notes the efforts by the South African Police Service to arrest the perpetrators of the crime. The EOM observed that the political parties commendably conducted largely peaceful campaigns and upheld their commitments to the Code of Conduct that was signed on 20th March 2019. The peaceful pre-election environment provided an atmosphere for South Africa to freely express their support for their Syrian political parties. EISA observers witnessed the special voting on 6th and 7th May 2019 at 62 voting stations and 35 home visits across all the 9 provinces. All teams reported that the process was well organized in line with set guidelines. Observers also noted that there were limited voter awareness of the required procedures for special voting, as a number of voters turned up to vote without prior application for special voting. On election day proper, the EISA observers visited 295 voting stations across the 9 provinces. Election day was largely peaceful across the country. However, the EOM notes reports of service delivery protests in the following areas: Lokamazi, Secunda, Bushbuck Ridge, Vumani. There was also a case of an attempted hijack of election materials and officials in Guyana, which was foiled by the South Africa Police Service. The mission notes the efforts by the Independent Electoral Commission and the police to contain these challenges in a timely manner to ensure that the electoral process was not interrupted. However, the elections were postponed in Opan due to some protests. Positive features of the 2019 elections. The Electoral Laws Amendment Act 2019 contributed to the improved quality of the voters' role and compliance with the rule of law in the electoral process and consequently strengthen public confidence in the process. Consulted stakeholders, including political parties, lauded the Independent Electoral Commission for its transparency, open communication, and engagement with stakeholders. They expressed their confidence in the IEC's effective management of the process. To enhance transparency, the IEC ensured that each step in the party registration and nomination process was open to objections and dispute resolution before finalization. Following public inspection of party lists, 53 sets of objections were raised. 52 of these were dismissed by the IEC, and only one involving a candidate who had flouted the qualification requirement was sustained. Furthermore, the mission commends the efforts of the IEC to promote the participation of women and youth. Of the 189,000 elections staff recruited for the elections, 73% were women. Moreover, a majority of 59% of the staff recruited for the elections were below the age of 35, and 25% were under 25 years old. And the IEC election 2019 communication campaign also focused on encouraging participation of young people, especially the first-time voters. Since 1994, private funding of political parties has been unregulated in a situation which has contributed to an uneven playing field for political competition in the country. The EISA EOM welcomes the enactment of the Political Parties Funding Act 2018, which regulates private contributions to political parties. The EOM notes that this was one of its recommendations from previous election observation reports. However, the EISA EOM also notes that due to the late enactment of the law, the IEC was unable to finalize the guidelines for operationalization of the law ahead of the 2019 elections. The EISA Observer Mission commends political parties that have taken deliberate steps to promote gender equality within their policies. Such deliberate policies must be encouraged as good practice across all parties. The EISA EOM welcomes a special voting arrangement allowing for the inclusion of persons outside their district, disabled and infirm voters through home visit as a good practice. The EOM considers the independent auditing of the election results before release as a good practice to be emulated in order to promote credibility and transparency of the process. The EOM will comment more broadly on the results management process in its final report. The EISA EOM specifically appreciates the efforts of the South African Police Service to provide security for its observers in their selected areas of deployment. Issues of concern. While recognizing the progress in gender representation, women are still underrepresented in the South African Parliament. While at 55% of the electorate, women constitute a majority of the registered voters for the 2019 elections. Their participation as candidates is not commensurate with this percentage, as they constitute only 40% of the total candidates for the 2019 elections. We note the reduction in registration rates among youth for the 2019 elections. The number of registered youth in the 18 to 19 age bracket dropped by 47.2% from 646,301 in 2014 to 341,236 in 2019. The number of registered voters in the 20 to 29 age bracket also recorded a 4% drop from 5,759,236 in 2014 to 5,299,297 in 2019. Indeed, compared to the voter registration statistics in 2014, when the 20 to 29 age bracket formed the second highest group of voters at 22.68%, in 2019, this age bracket only represents 19.89% of the total registered voters. This shows generally that the youth participation has dropped. The UM notes media reports that ballot boxes were found in the streets of Zanyan and Limpopo. The IEC investigated the matter, which led to suspension of an IEC officer. Another official was also arrested for non-compliance with the requirements for secrecy of the ballot during special voting. The EOM commends the IEC for its quick response to these incidents. The EOM notes the allegations of multiple voting in some areas of the country, even though we did not directly observe it. We observed that the indelible ink used during the process was easily removable. It is important, however, to mention that in comparison to the voter turnout recorded in 2014, 73.48%, it seems that there is so far no unusual increase in voter turnout in the 2019 elections, which is about 65%. This would have been expected in a situation of widespread multiple voting. The UM notes the actions taken by the IEC so far on the matter to bring perpetrators of this violation to account and its commitment to investigate further. Our recommendations. Based on its findings, the EISA EOM offers the following preliminary recommendations that will be expanded in the final report. 1, reconsider the timing of legal reforms and enactment of new laws within the electoral cycle to ensure that laws can be operationalized well ahead of elections. 2, to address the concerns of multiple voting, consider creating a harmonized digital voter register to ensure that the scanner machines can be used to track persons who have already cast their ballots and serve the purpose of double check alongside the hard copy register. 3, put in place adequate mechanisms for management of substations to ensure that the number of voters per voting point is easily manageable. This will quicken the process and reduce voters' waiting time and also shorten the time used in counting the ballots. To raise citizens' awareness on the procedures for application for special voting. Our preliminary conclusion. Overall, the 2019 elections were conducted within a strong legal and institutional framework that guarantees democratic elections. The key players in the process conducted themselves in accordance with stipulated laws and guidelines. South Africa, through these elections, met its obligations to democratic elections set out in the different international instruments to which it is a party. The EISA EOM notes the recent allegation of electoral fraud by some political parties. The EISA EOM has not observed any unusual increase in voter turnout in comparison to previous elections. Such an increase would have been expected in the case of widespread multiple voting. We call on the aggrieved parties to freely express their dissatisfaction within the confines of the law. We call on South Africans to maintain their trust in the judiciary. The EISA EOM wishes to further encourage political leaders to be measured and well-informed in their pronouncements to avoid misleading or inciting the public. Political parties should also work with the IEC to determine the extent of the alleged multiple voting and its overall impact on the process. The EISA commends South Africa for its continued commitment to democracy and the conduct of a peaceful electoral process. The mission encourages the country to maintain the good practice that has been identified in this report. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to us.
Thank you very much for your briefing, Your Excellency. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, if there are any specific questions for the team up here, you may raise your hands and ask any peculiar questions that you seek answers from.
One, two. Thank you so much. My name is Govin Whittles from ENCA. You've mentioned a number of observations that you made in the run-up to elections, such as the political violence in KwaZulu-Natal, some service delivery protest, and an attempted hijack of election materials. Has EISA been able to ascertain how that impacted on people coming to the voting booths or the voting stations and taking part in the election? Did any of those factors dissuade people from coming to the voting stations?
Okay.
And when can we expect EISA to weigh in on how the objections by the smaller parties would affect the credibility of the election?
There's another question here. On the left, over here.
Hello. 1, 2. Peggy Maile, Channels Television, Nigeria. Nigeria recently had elections. So what are some of the lessons you will take from the elections here? What are some of the positives that you will take that you might want to apply back home? And what are some of the lessons that you may want to share with the IEC?
Hi, I'm Paul Mukwena, ISPSA. I want clarity in terms of the ink. I still have mine here. So I thought maybe IEC insisted tender to one company at least to get those marking pens because mine is still here. And I'm hearing people saying the ink is yatsu. So I just want to find out that do you have a tangible evidence that shows that people voted again with the ink thing? I just want clarity about that because I don't know where the story is leading. Thank you.
Okay.
Karabole Tata, CNBC Africa. I would just like to know from EISA if one of the recommendations around the process of monitoring elections in South Africa or conducting elections is the possible digitization of the process. Because the manual process, the zip machines, is really what's in question here. Does the machine talk to any other machine? So how can we improve that process? Thank you very much.
I think we'll take one more question and then we'll allow the President to provide responses before we take more questions. Yes. It's the last one over there.
Sophie Mkwena from the SABC. I just want to find out from former President Jonathan to ensure that we have credible elections on the continent. What is it that we can do, particularly looking at the electoral body? How do we ensure that they are ready, training its officials, but making sure that even the technical aspect of elections, we are ready?
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, at least for the 5 questions so far presented. The first question, the first question talks about the areas where some security breaches before the elections, and wanted to know whether those breaches did affect the turnout of voters. Generally, let me say in the African setting, I cannot talk about very developed parts of the world. When there are major security breaches in places, so many people get afraid to go because they wouldn't want to be victims. But like in this case, we also noted in the report that those were minor incidents, they were not widespread incidents, and the police also took action immediately. So when something happened, we are lucky nobody died in all these issues we even noted. But even if it results to death, if the police takes a very effective action immediately, it gives people the confidence that they are safe. And in this case, we never hear about people complaining that they couldn't go out to vote because of those incidents that the police handled very well. The second person wanted, this may be personal, they are asking me, because I was not a member of the EISA team that observed the Nigerian election. Maybe my deputy leader, who is the executive director of EISA, was there himself. So he may even get better. But the key thing is wanted to know the lessons we Nigerians can learn from South Africa, or if there are lessons South Africa could also learn from Nigeria in terms of the elections. This one also is similar to the last question that I was asked about the continent. What do we do to improve the management of our elections in the continent? I think the African Union is doing well, the Political Affairs Department, because they have guidelines, the minimum expectation for conduct of elections. SADC also have for this region. And of course, internationally too, there are guidelines. Because democracy is not just about going to vote. You can continue to vote for 100 times and the same person continue to win elections if the person is not even doing well. So democracy is beyond just regular, every 5 years, every 4 years, then you go to vote. The elections must be credible. And where the elections are not credible, then of course you can't say you're practicing democracy. Here we are quite pleased because the pre-election issues are key. First and foremost, if we as a continent we must move forward, then the electorates, the political parties and other stakeholders must have confidence in 2 institutions. That is the electoral body, the body that manages the election, in this case the Independent Electoral Commission. People must have confidence how they are constituted. And that's one area that the AU need to look into it, so that we can get minimum guidelines across the continent. If you must practice democracy, then while setting up your electoral body, this is the minimum expectation for any African country. Because if from day one, people have no confidence in the electoral management body, then no matter what they do, people will not believe. The next is the security. If people feel that the security is biased in favor of one party, either the ruling party or one opposition party, and so on and so forth, then no matter what, people will protest. And one action will lead to a reaction, and that reaction will lead to another reaction, and you will have crises across. So to me, generally, is that I commend the SA so much, South Africa, because the way you constitute your electoral body is quite unique. Does not give just the president alone to nominate everybody. So that gives a lot of confidence in the people, just like how you get judges in the courts. So even Nigeria too, maybe that's an area we should look at it. How do we constitute our electoral bodies to make sure that citizens have confidence in what they do? And of course, the issue of the security. Yes, somebody also did mention about the ink, and I'm quite pleased to hear that your own ink is still there, the indelible, because the ink is supposed to be indelible. And ordinarily, the ink is supposed to last for at least 2 days, so that you don't vote somewhere, wash it out, then though people have different ways of removing stains, technology has improved so much. Maybe there are some people who have some kind of chemicals that when they dump their fingers into that chemical to pull out, take out the ink, probably you don't know. Or probably different contractors supply the ink, I don't know. But even in a statement, this, what I presented is actually a summary, but even in our full preliminary statement, we noted that we, as I didn't really observe that. But people are saying, people are even claiming on radio that they voted 2 times. For somebody to come on radio to declare that I've committed a criminal offense because the person wants to raise an issue that concerns the country, you cannot look down or play it low. And that's why we are raising it. We did not observe double voting. We did not see anybody who was able to remove the indelible ink. But the story is everywhere. And we feel that if we don't make a little comment on that, it will not be fair to the citizens. I think I've covered the 5 questions raised because I combined 2. Forget that. So go on.
We will take one more round of questions and then we'll be done for the afternoon. Yes.
Exposing us to all kinds of risk. Well, you know, you say one little thing here, you start hitting the back home. True. She can't talk. I don't know that question. No, she's there. I think the mic is not working. Maybe. Come up.
Karabole Sacha, CNBC Africa. As a body that looks into the sustainability of democracy on the continent, I don't know, this may just be a personal thing, but I felt attacked by the amount of paper that is used within the system. Surely that cannot be sustainable. As a body, what are you telling electoral bodies throughout the continent about that? Thank you.
Thank you for raising this. That reminds me that a particular question that I think I didn't answer properly, because you talked about sustainability of democracy in Africa. I think that is even the interest of EISA, because EISA is beyond just observing elections. It's an institute that does some research work, use professionals to look into how do we sustain democracy in Africa, and they also have their own publication. But everything about election democracy is the people. And of course, the government plays a key role. And just like I've mentioned, the other issues about the independence of the independent commissions. Because the name independent, if you look at all the commissions conducting elections across Africa, in one way or the other, that word independence is always there. But how many of them are actually independent is the issue. But if we're able to maintain that, that can make democratic processes to endure. But the issue you raise is the ballot papers. What you're saying is that, can we do something else than manual voting, manual counting? In fact, in one of our interactions with the INEC chairman, the IEC chairman, and the members, we actually raised that whether they are considering going to fully digital management of elections. where young people can stay in their rooms and use their smartphones and vote. That you don't need to go and queue up and vote. Or you have stations that people who don't have smartphones can go and vote. You are doing diaspora voting. As you are voting, the results are being recorded automatically. So the issue of snatching ballot boxes will not be there, and so on and so forth. So people are moving gradually. There is always fear, because technology, if a country, or these superior countries like America could be afraid that people hacked into their system to manipulate data, then which African country you can say that we are so safe? So that fear that some of these are smart boys will just stay in their bedrooms and change figures is I think is the major limiting factor. But I believe we'll get over that. Most people, whether you like it or not, the world is going digital. And we cannot continue in the manual processing of results. We must get to a point where we will fully adopt technology in terms of managing our electoral processes. That is my belief, and most countries, they are discussing. Just as I mentioned to you, we even had the conversation with the chairman on the issue of applying that, because in Africa, if one country that we believe will start is South Africa, because technology is quite high compared to most other African countries. So I believe South Africa could lead African countries in that direction. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is all time would allow us this afternoon. We do have copies of the statement at the back with Olufuncho. So if you want an actual copy of the full statement, it's at the back. And then if you also want to engage on a one-on-one session with us, the team will still be around for an hour or so that we can have further interaction. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you for your attention.